The galaxy had not been conquered in 11,000 years, because nothing in it was ever allowed to fight. Aaron Saul knew that the way other beings knew their own heartbeat. He had been a proof clerk of the Concordance of Still Rule for 240 years, and in all that time, he had never once seen a weapon fired in anger. He had seen worlds end. He had filed the orders himself, but there had been no battle, no last stand, no smoke. A world that displeased the Concordance simply stopped being granted. Its lights went out between one breath and the next, and the record showed that it had never truly existed in the first place. That was the law of Still Rule, and the law was a machine. The machine did not hate, it did not want, it only proved. Every star, every fleet, every living thing in the 7 great empires existed because the Concordance had examined it and found it consistent. Anything inconsistent was not destroyed. It was unproven, which was a far colder thing. To be unproven was to be removed from the ledger of real objects, and once removed, you had simply never happened, and no one mourned a thing that had never happened. Aaron had spent his whole life inside that perfect, quiet, bloodless order. He had believed, the way you believe the floor will hold, that it could never break. Then the warship appeared, and the floor did not hold. It came from nowhere. Aaron would repeat that phrase to himself for the rest of his life, and it would never stop being true. There was no approach vector, there was no drift wake, no entry burn, no folding of space that the listening stations could record. The 7 empires maintained a survey net of 400 million sensor buoys, and not one of them caught the warship arriving. At one moment, the volume of space above the Still Rule home reach was empty, and proven, and silent. At the next moment, there was a hull there, long and gray, and scarred, sitting motionless, as if it had always been sitting there, as if the galaxy had simply forgotten to write it down. The buoys did the only thing buoys could do. They tried to prove the new object. They failed. Aaron was on shift in the Hall of Findings when the failure rang through the building. He had never heard the building make that sound before. It was not an alarm. The Concordance did not use alarms, because alarms admitted that something could go wrong. It was a single sustained tone, the note the great machine made when it encountered an object it could not resolve into the ledger. Aaron had been told, as a young clerk, that he would never hear that tone in his lifetime. The senior clerks had been told the same thing. So had their seniors, back and back for 100 generations. He stood up so fast he knocked his stylus to the floor. On the great proving wall, the new object turned and turned, rendered in cold white light. The wall was trying to assign it a class, a history, an origin. Every empire's ship had a lineage the machine could trace, a yard that had built it, a granting that had made it real. The wall searched for the warship's lineage and found nothing. It searched the warship's metal and found alloys that matched no foundry in the catalog. It searched the warship's markings, 3 short letters burned into the prow, and the markings were not in any language the Concordance had ever proven. The letters were E, A, R. The wall flashed a verdict Aaron had read 10,000 times in his career, the easy verdict, the safe one, unproven, recommend removal. The Concordance reached out, the way it had reached out to 1,000,000 worlds before, to simply unwrite the thing from existence. And the warship did not vanish. Aaron would remember the silence in the hall most of all. 200 clerks, all of them experts in a law that had never failed, watching the machine try to delete a single gray ship, and watching the ship remain exactly where it was. The proving wall pushed the verdict again. The ship stayed. It pushed a third time, with the full weight of the home reach behind it, enough authority to unwrite a star. The ship stayed. Then the ship answered. It was not a weapon. Aaron understood that later, and it terrified him more than any weapon could have. The warship simply sent a message back down the same channel the Concordance had used to try to delete it. A plain message in a plain machine tongue, slow and patient, as if it had all the time that ever was. The message said, "Verdict received. Verdict rejected. We are the slow verdict, out of Earth, and we have come to review your judgments." A junior clerk laughed. It was a nervous sound, and it died fast, because no one else laughed with her. The senior clerks were not laughing. The senior clerks were watching the proving wall do something it was not built to do. It was trying to remove the warship, and instead, It was the warship that was changing the wall, reaching back along the channel into the machine itself, opening the ledger, reading the law from the inside. Reviewing the judgments. Irun looked at the name again, the slow verdict. A warship named like a court. He did not yet understand the joke in that name. He would. The whole galaxy would, before it was over. The home reach declared an emergency that had no name, because no emergency had ever happened before. 7 empires were notified in the same instant. 7 empires answered the only way they knew how. They did not send envoys. They did not ask what the warship wanted. They had no procedure for asking, because in 11,000 years, nothing had ever wanted anything the law had not already granted. So they did what the law told them to do, with an unproven object that refused to be removed. They sent fleets to prove it dead. Irun watched the order leave the Hall of Findings, watched it ripple out across the proven dark toward 400 million buoys and 1,000 silent yards, and the assembled might of the 7 great empires. He should have felt nothing. He had filed the end of worlds and felt nothing. The law was the law. The unproven were the unproven. Instead, he felt his own hands shaking, and he could not have said why, except that something at the very bottom of him, older than 240 years of clerking, had heard a single gray ship say, "We have come to review your judgments," and had thought, with a clerk's quiet horror, "At last someone has come to review them." He bent and picked his stylus up off the floor. Around him the hall was filling with the language of war, a language none of them had ever needed to speak. It was a clumsy language. That was the thing Aaron noticed even in those first minutes, even through the shaking of his own hands. The clerks did not have the words. They had words for granting and removal, for findings and seals, for the cold, quiet machinery of deciding what was real. They did not have words for an enemy that fought back. The senior clerk beside him kept trying to phrase the order, and kept reaching for a verb that did not exist, because no verb in the language of still rule meant attack a thing that will not die. She finally settled on the oldest word she could find, a word the catalog had marked obsolete 11,000 years ago, and she said it aloud, and Aaron heard how strange it sounded in her mouth. Engage. The concordance had not engaged anything in all the time it had ruled. It had only removed. And it could not remove the slow verdict. That was the fact that sat under everything, the fact the whole hall was trying not to look at directly. For 11,000 years, the answer to every problem had been the same single answer, the same clean verdict, the same painless unwriting of whatever did not fit. The answer had never once failed. It had become less a tool than a faith, a thing the clerks believed the way they believed in the floor and the air, and now the faith had a hole in it, the exact size and shape of one gray warship, and through that hole, Aaron could feel a cold wind blowing that he had never felt before, the wind of a thing that could happen that the law had not allowed for. He looked around the Hall of Findings at the 200 clerks he had worked beside for longer than most species lived. He saw the same wind on every face. They had all built their lives on the same floor, and the floor had a hole in it now, and not one of them knew how to stand. Aaron set his stylus down on his desk, carefully, the way you set down a thing you are not sure you will pick up again. Then he turned back to the proving wall, to the gray speck that had come from nowhere, and he waited with the rest of them. Above the home reach, the slow verdict sat motionless, scarred and old and entirely unafraid, and waited for the empires to come and be reviewed. The first fleet to reach the slow verdict belonged to the Scepter Authority, the oldest of the 7 empires, and the Scepter Authority did not believe in second chances because it had never once needed a first. Irun watched it arrive on the proving wall, 4,012 ships, every one of them granted, proven, lawful, down to the last rivet. They came in the perfect lattice formation the Concordance taught all its empires, a formation that had never been broken because it had never been tested. The scepter vessels did not carry the crude burning weapons of unproven species. They carried removal arrays, machines that did to a single ship what the Concordance did to a world. They would surround the gray warship, link their arrays into one mind, and unwrite it from the catalog. It would take 11 seconds. The procedure had a fixed duration because it had never once failed to finish. The 4,000 ships took station. The arrays linked. The home reach lent its authority. The removal began. Bochgan. Aaron counted in his head. He could not help it. The 11th second came. The slow verdict was still there. He heard the senior clerk beside him stop breathing. On the wall, the Scepter Fleet's arrays were straining, drawing more and more authority from the home reach. Enough now to unwrite 100 worlds, all of it pouring into the deletion of one gray hull, and the hull simply sat in it, like a stone sits in a river. It was not resisting. That was the thing Aaron could not make himself understand. Resistance the law could measure. The slow verdict was not resisting the verdict. It was refusing to accept that the verdict applied to it. It had read the law from the inside, and it had found the place where the law assumed that every object would agree to be judged, and it had simply declined. Then the slow verdict moved. In 11,000 years, no ship had moved against a granting fleet, so there was no word for what it did, and Aaron reached for one and found only the old word, the unproven word, the word from before the law. The gray warship attacked. It did not use a removal array, because it did not have one, because the species that built it had never learned to make a world stop existing. It had learned the older art instead, the art the Concordance had filed away as primitive 11,000 years ago and never thought about again. The slow verdict opened fire. The first salvo crossed the gap between the warship and the scepter lattice in less than a second. Aaron did not understand what he was seeing. There were no removal arrays. There was only light and metal moving at terrible speed, and where the metal touched the proven hulls of the Scepter Authority, the proven hulls came apart. Not unwritten, not removed from the ledger. Broken. Torn open to the dark venting air and crew, and the smug certainty of 11,000 years. Aaron had never seen a ship break before. He understood that now, watching it happen, that he had spent 240 years filing the ends of things, without ever once seeing an end. A removal was clean. A removal was a line in the ledger, and a light going out, and the clerk who wrote it never saw the thing that had been removed, because the whole point of removal was that there was nothing left to see. But the slow verdict did not remove. It broke. And breaking had a shape, and the shape was terrible. He watched a scepter cruiser come apart along its spine, watched the hull peel open like a fruit, watched the small bright sparks that he knew, with a sick lurch, were the crew, the proven lawful granted crew, leaving their ship through the hole in its side and going out into the dark. He had ended 100 such crews with a line of text and felt nothing. He felt this. He could not stop feeling it. The slow verdict had not only broken the ships, it had broken the distance that the law had always kept between a clerk and the things a clerk decided. The scepter ships died, and their deaths stayed in the record, because nothing had unwritten them. That was the horror of it, for a being raised under still rule. When the law removed a thing, the thing had never existed, and so no one had to carry the memory of it. But the slow verdict did not remove. It destroyed, and destruction left a corpse, and a corpse was a fact, and a fact had to be remembered. And the 7 empires had spent 11,000 years making sure no one ever had to remember anything at all. 300 scepter ships were dead in the first minute. The lattice, which had never needed to do anything but hold formation, did not know how to break formation. It held. It held while the gray warship moved through it on a long, unhurried curve, firing as it went, and the formation that had been the proof of the Empire's perfection became the reason the Empire could not get out of the way. Aaron heard a clerk somewhere behind him begin to recite the law of still rule under his breath, the way a frightened child recites a prayer. Every object is granted or removed. There is no third state. There is no third state. There is no third state. On the wall, the slow verdict was the third state. The Scepter Authority committed its reserve, 800 more ships folding in around the warship, and for one moment, the proving wall showed the gray hull entirely swallowed by light, ringed on every side, and the youngest clerks let out a breath because surely now, even a thing that refused to be judged could be buried under enough proven firepower. The light cleared. The slow verdict came out the far side of it. Aaron looked for damage and found scorch, a long bright wound along the warship's flank, where the proven weapons had at last managed to touch it. It was hurt. It could be hurt. That should have comforted him, and it did not, because the warship that could be hurt was not slowing down, was not turning away, was not asking for terms. It had taken the worst the oldest empire could throw, and it had answered by killing 900 more ships. And now, It was sending another message down the channel into the home reach, the same plain, patient machine voice as before. The message said, Scepter Authority, Judgment under review. Charge, removal of the world Habron, 4,000 years past. For the offense of growing food the Concordance had not granted. We have read your ledger. We have found the order. We have found your name on it. Verdict pending. Aaron went very cold. He knew the world Habron. Of course he did. He had been a young clerk when the order came through the Hall of Findings. 4,000 years was wrong. It had been within his own service, 200 years ago. A small green world that had bred a grain the catalog did not contain, and the Concordance had ruled the grain unproven, and the world had been removed for the crime of feeding itself. Aaron had filed the closing record. He had written the line that said, The world Habron is found never to have existed. He had felt nothing. He felt something now. He felt the warship reach into the part of the ledger he had sealed with his own hand, 200 years ago, and open it, and read his name in the margin. We have found your name on it. It was not speaking to him. It was speaking to the Scepter Authority. But Aaron's name was in that margin too, a clerk's small name beneath the Great Seal, and for the first time in 240 years, he understood that the law he had served did not protect him. It had only included him. There was a difference, and the Grey Warship had come 11,000 years to teach it. The Scepter Authority broke. Not all at once. Empires that old do not break all at once. But the lattice, which had never broken, broke. And the surviving ships did the thing no granted vessel had ever done in the history of still rule. They fled. They abandoned formation and ran for the folds of space. And the slow verdict let them go, did not chase, did not finish them, because the slow verdict was not there to win a battle. It was there to review a judgment, and the judgment had been reviewed, and the verdict had been entered, and the Scepter Authority, oldest of the 7 empires, was found. Aaron watched the word appear on the proving wall, and it was not the word he had written 10,000 times. It was not unproven. It was a word the Concordance did not have, a word the Grey Warship had brought with it out of nowhere, and the wall had no choice but to display it, because the warship had written it directly into the ledger from the inside. The word was guilty. The Hall of Findings, 200 clerks deep, made no sound at all. Then the home reach did the second thing it had never done. It spoke to the other 6 empires, not with an order but with a question, and the question was the most frightening thing Aaron had heard in his entire life, because the Concordance was the law, and the law did not ask questions. The law gave answers, and now the law was asking the 6 surviving empires what should be done about a thing it could not delete. The 6 empires answered together. They had watched the Scepter Authority die. They were the Iron Synod, the Pale Accord, the Tessine Reach, the Helic Crown, the Auburn Mandate, and the Concord of Stars itself. And between them, they commanded more ships than there were buoys in the survey net. And they had ruled in perfect bloodless silence for 11,000 years, and they were afraid. Aaron watched the fear arrive, and it did not look the way fear looked in the old records the catalog had marked obsolete. The 6 empires did not panic in the way of unproven species, did not scream or scatter or beg. They were too old for that. But Aaron had spent his whole career reading the small marks that beings make when they are not saying what they feel, and he read them now on the channels between the 6 empires, and what he read was terror. The Iron Synod requested, 3 separate times, a recalculation of the warship's removal, as if the machine might have made an error, as if the law might be persuaded to try again and succeed. The Pale Accord asked the home reach to confirm that the Scepter Authority's destruction was, in fact, real, that the 4,000 dead ships were truly dead, and not some illusion the unproven thing had projected. The home reach confirmed it. The home reach had to confirm it. And Aaron watched 6 immortal empires receive the confirmation that a single ship had broken the oldest fleet in the galaxy in under an hour, and he watched them understand, all at once, what every clerk in the hall had already begun to understand, which was that the law might not save them. That understanding was the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, and the 6 empires knew it. A being who believes the law will save him, obeys the law. A being who has just watched the law fail, will do anything at all. And so the 6 empires, in the same instant, made the same decision, the decision of the frightened powerful, which is to stop thinking and start spending. They would not outwit the warship. They would not negotiate with it. They would simply bury it under so much firepower that no cleverness, no refusal, no 11,000-year patience could possibly matter, because the universe itself would not have room left in it for one more gray ship. So they did not send one fleet, they sent all of them. Erun watched the proving wall fill with light until there was no dark left in it at all. The 6 empires emptied their yards. They committed reserves that had never been committed, because there had never been a war to commit them to. They built a wall of granted hulls around the home reach, around the Hall of Findings, around the great machine that proved the galaxy real, and at the center of all of it, the wall left a single gray speck, the slow verdict, scarred and burning and patient, one ship against the assembled might of 6 immortal empires. It was a moment, before the 6 empires fired, that Erun would remember as clearly as the warship's arrival, and it was a moment of pure silence. The wall of 2 million ships had finished forming. The gray speck sat at the center of it. And for perhaps 10 seconds nothing happened at all, because even the 6 empires, even the great machine, even the law itself seemed to pause at the edge of the thing it was about to do. Erun thought, in that silence, that it was the closest the Concordance had ever come to doubt. 2 million ships, 1 gray hull. The numbers were absurd, were a foregone conclusion, were the most decisive advantage in the history of the galaxy, and still the law paused, because some part of it, some deep buried part beneath all the certainty, had already watched a single ship break the oldest empire in under an hour, and was no longer entirely sure that numbers were enough. The silence broke. The empires fired. But Erun never forgot the pause, because the pause was the first time in 11,000 years that the law had hesitated, and a law that can hesitate is a law that can be wrong, and a law that can be wrong is not a god. It is only a very large machine. The slow verdict had not yet fired a shot in that second battle, and it had already taught the galaxy the most dangerous lesson there was. It had taught the law to doubt itself. A young clerk whispered the number aloud, because the wall had counted them. 6 empires. 2,100,000 ships. Erun did the arithmetic without wanting to. 1 gray warship. 2,100,000 granted hulls. He had filed the odds of 1,000 engagements that had never been fought, and he knew what odds like these meant. They meant the unproven thing would last perhaps a minute, perhaps 2, and then there would be so much firepower poured into one point of space that not even a ship that refused to be judged could refuse the simple physical fact of being torn apart. That was what the law told him. But the law had told him the warship would be removed in 11 seconds, and the law had told him the scepter authority could not break, and the law had been wrong both times, and Erun Sol, proof clerk of the Concordance for 240 years, found that he no longer believed a single word the law said. He looked at the gray speck at the center of 2 million guns, and he did something a clerk of still rule was never supposed to do. He hoped. The slow verdict sent one more message before the 6 empires opened fire. It went down the channel into the home reach, and the home reach, having no procedure to refuse it, displayed it on the proving wall for all 200 clerks to read. The message said, "To the 6 empires of still rule, you have answered a review of your judgments by gathering your fleets to remove the reviewer. Let the record show that this is itself a judgment, and that we have read it. We did not come to fight you. We came because 200 years ago, you unwrote a world for growing grain, and 40 years before that, a world for singing in an unproven key, and 11,000 years of worlds before those, and not one of them was permitted to exist long enough to be remembered. We are the memory you removed. We are the slow verdict. We have been a long time coming. We are not in a hurry now." And then, beneath that, in the plain machine tongue, a single line that Erun would carry to the end of his days. The message said, "Begin when ready. We will review you all." The 6 empires began. The proving wall went white. 2 million ships fired into one point of space at the same instant. More energy than the Concordance had spent on removals in 1,000 years. All of it converging on a single gray hull. The Hall of Findings filled with reflected light so bright, the clerks shielded their eyes. Erun did not shield his. He stared into the white, and he searched it for a shape, for the gray speck, for the warship that had said, "Begin when ready," as if it were granting them a favor. The light held for a long time, longer than a ship should survive, longer than physics allowed, and in the heart of it, when Aaron's eyes adjusted, he saw that the speck was still there. It was moving. The slow verdict had not stayed to be buried. The instant the 6 empires fired, it had begun to move, and it was moving now through the wall of 2 million ships, the way it had moved through the scepter lattice, on a long, unhurried curve, except that this time there was no end to the targets. This time the targets went on forever, in every direction, and the warship simply began at the nearest and continued. Aaron would try, for the rest of his life, to describe what the warship did in those first minutes, and he would never get it right, because there was no honest way to make it sound possible. The 6 empires had built a wall of light around one point of space, a sphere of fire 2 million ships deep, and the law of physics said that nothing inside that sphere could survive, and the law of still rule said that nothing inside that sphere was real anymore. Both laws were wrong. The slow verdict came apart at the seams of that sphere, and put itself back together on the far side of every seam, and where it passed, the granted ships died. Aaron watched the warship choose its lanes. That was the thing that frightened him most, more than the survival, more than the killing. It was choosing. It was not lashing out blindly at an ocean of enemies. It was reading the formation, finding the joints where the empires had linked their fleets together, and breaking those joints first, so that the wall of 2 million ships came apart not at random, but along its weakest lines, the way a thing breaks when something that understands it decides exactly where to push. The 6 empires had never fought anyone. The slow verdict had spent 11,000 years in a buried hull, doing nothing but thinking about exactly this. The difference showed. It showed in every minute of the 9 hours. The empires brought numbers, and numbers were all they had, because numbers were all the law had ever needed. The warship brought patience, and intelligence, and the terrible focus of a thing with nothing left to protect, and nothing left to lose. And it spent those gifts the way the empires spent ships, freely, without fear, knowing exactly what each one was worth. Aaron watched a gray ship the size of nothing fire into an ocean of granted hulls, and watched the ocean begin, ship by ship, to come apart. The Auburn Mandate tried a different answer in the 3rd hour, and Aaron watched it fail, and the failure told him more about the warship than any of its victories had. The Mandate had noticed, as Aaron had noticed, that the slow verdict chose its lanes, that it read formations and broke them at the joints. So the Mandate stopped using formations. It scattered its fleets into chaos, 100,000 ships moving at random, no lattice, no joints, nothing for the warship to read. It was a clever thing to do. It was the first genuinely clever thing any of the 6 empires had done, and Aaron felt a small, cold hope that perhaps it would work, that perhaps chaos was the one thing the warship could not outthink. It did not work. The slow verdict adapted in seconds. A formation has joints because someone designed it, and a designed thing can be read. But chaos has a different weakness, which is that chaos cannot concentrate. 100,000 ships moving at random cannot bring their fire to bear on one point, because they are all in each other's way, and the warship simply moved to the places where the chaos was thinnest, and carved through them, while the rest of the scattered fleet fired uselessly into the dark, or, worse, into one another. The Mandate had traded the strength of order for the freedom of chaos, and the warship had punished it for both, and Aaron understood then that there was no formation, no scattering, no clever answer that would work, because the problem was not the shape of the fleets. The problem was that the thing inside the fleets had spent 11,000 years preparing for this exact day, and the fleets had spent 11,000 years certain that this day could never come. The home reach made its tone again, the tone for an object it could not resolve, and this time it did not stop. It rang and rang through the hall of findings, one long, unbroken note, the sound of a law discovering that it was not, after all, the largest thing in the galaxy. Aaron Saul stood in the ringing and the white light, a clerk of a dying order, and he found that he was no longer afraid. He was something he had no word for, something from before the law, and it took him a moment to recognize it, because he had never felt it in 240 years. He was glad. The battle above the home reach lasted 9 hours, and in those 9 hours, Aaron Saul learned everything he had never been taught about where the slow verdict had come from. He learned it because the warship told him. Not him alone, but the whole hall, the whole concordance, every clerk and every empire listening on the channel. The slow verdict fought and spoke at the same time, the way a thing speaks when it has waited a very long time to be heard, and does not intend to be silenced before it finishes. Between salvos, while it carved lanes through the granted fleets, it sent its history down the channel, into the great machine, and the machine, which had no procedure to refuse, wrote it on the proving wall for all of them to read. The warship had been buried. That was the first thing Arun learned, and it undid him. He had assumed, the way everyone had assumed, that the gray ship was a new thing, a weapon some unproven species had only just built. It was not new. It was old. It was older than the concordance itself. The slow verdict had been launched from a world called Earth, 11,400 years ago, in the last age before the law, when there were still species in the galaxy who fought, and it had been sent out into the dark to find out whether the rumors were true, whether something was going from star to star quietly unwriting anyone who displeased it. The rumors had been true. The young concordance had unwritten Earth, while the slow verdict was still outbound, too far to turn back, too far even to be told. The order had gone out, and a green world had stopped being granted, and the record had been sealed, and the small clerk who sealed it had felt nothing, because it had happened long before Aaron was born, before any clerk now living was born, in the first century of the law when the law was hungry and new. Earth was found never to have existed. Aaron could see the line on the wall. It was written in the old seal, the first seal, the one they no longer used. And the slow verdict had been out in the dark when its own world was unwritten, and the unwriting had reached out along the channel to remove the ship too, to clean up the last loose thread of a world that had never happened. And the slow verdict had refused. That was the second thing Aaron learned, and it was the heart of everything. The warship had not been built to be unkillable. No ship was. But it had been a long way from home when the law came for it, and it had been carrying something the law had not counted on. It had been carrying the memory of Earth. Every record, every song, every name, every grain of the world that made it, stored in its gray hull and in the minds of its crew. And when the concordance reached out to unwrite the ship, to make it have never existed, the ship had a thing the law could not argue with. It had proof, not the law's proof, the cold catalog proof of granting and removal. The older proof, it remembered. And a thing that remembers cannot be told it never existed, because the memory is itself the evidence. And so the unwriting had reached the slow verdict and found, for the first time, an object that could not be made to have never happened, because it carried within itself the unbroken record of having happened. The law could remove a world, it could not remove a witness who refused to forget. Aaron read that on the wall, and felt the whole shape of his life turn over. He had spent 240 years believing that removal was final, that an unwritten thing was truly gone, that the line he sealed at the bottom of a closing record was the last word that could ever be said about a world. He had believed it, because believing it let him feel nothing. If the world had never existed, there was nothing to mourn, and a clerk who mourned nothing could file the next order with a steady hand. The whole machine ran on that one comfortable lie, the lie that the dead were not dead but merely never born, and every clerk in the hall had swallowed it, because the alternative was to carry the weight of every world they had ever closed. But the slow verdict had found the crack in the lie, 11,000 years ago, out in the dark, when the law came to unwrite it, and could not. The crack was simple. The crack was that memory is evidence. You can burn a house and say there was never a house, but if one person walked out of the fire carrying the deed is proof, and the lie cannot stand against the proof. The slow verdict had walked out of the burning of Earth carrying the deed, the whole deed, every record and song and name, and the law had reached for it and met a thing it could not argue with, and rather than admit it, could not win the argument. The law had hidden the argument away in a drift field for 11,000 years. The lie had a crack in it the whole time. The crack had a ship in it, and the ship had finally come home to widen the crack until the lie fell apart. The law could remove a world. It could not remove the proof that the world had been loved. And love, it turned out, was a kind of record the machine had never learned to read, and so had never learned to delete. So the slow verdict had not been unwritten. It had been, in the law's own language, unresolved. And rather than let an unresolved object sit in the catalog like a splinter, the young concordance had done the only thing it could. It had hidden the ship, it had folded a piece of dead space around it, a drift field at the cold edge of the galaxy where no buoy looked, and it had sealed the warship inside, and it had written in the ledger that the region was empty and proven and silent, and it had moved on. For 11,000 years, the slow verdict had drifted in a pocket of forgotten dark, its crew long dead, its memory intact, waiting, because a thing that remembers can wait forever. Aaron read all of this on the wall while the warship killed the fleets of 6 empires, and he understood at last the joke in the name. A slow verdict, a judgment that takes a long time to arrive. 11,000 years was not long, for a verdict that had been promised the moment Earth went dark. He learned the third thing near the 6th hour, when the Auburn Mandate threw its entire war host into a single converging strike, 40,000 ships folding onto the warship's position at once, and for the length of a held breath the gray hull was gone, swallowed. And Aaron thought, with a grief that surprised him, there, now it is over, now they have it. The slow verdict came through the strike. It was burning along half its length. Whole sections of it were dark and venting, and it sent a message that was not history and was not a verdict. It was the crew. There was a crew. After 11,000 years, there was still a crew, and Aaron had been wrong about that too. They were not the launch crew, the ones who had sailed from Earth. Those were long dead, their names in the hull's memory with all the other names of the dead world. The crew of the slow verdict now were the children of that memory. The ship had not been empty all those 11,000 years. The first crew had grown old in the drift field, and had children, and those children had children, born in a buried warship, raised on the unbroken record of a world that the galaxy said had never existed, and they had spent 11,000 years becoming the memory the law could not delete. Generation after generation, they had kept Earth real by remembering it, and they had kept the ship ready, and they had waited for the drift field to thin enough to slip out, and at last it had, and at last they had, and from nowhere, a warship had appeared above the home reach of the law that murdered their world. Aaron thought about the children. Then, while the warship killed the fleets of the Auburn Mandate, he could not stop thinking about them. 11,000 years of children, born in a buried hull, in a pocket of dead space at the cold edge of the galaxy, who would never see a sky, or a sea, or the green world their hull remembered. He tried to imagine what it would be to be born into that. To grow up knowing the whole of your home was a place that the rest of existence insisted had never been. To be told, every day of your childhood, here is Earth, here are its oceans, here is the grain it grew, here is the way the light fell in the evening, and to know that not one being outside your own hull believed a word of it, and to choose, anyway, to believe, because belief was the only weapon your people had left, because the moment you stopped remembering, the law would finally be right, and your world would truly never have existed. That was the war the crew of the slow verdict had been fighting for 11,000 years before they ever fired a shot. It was a war against forgetting, fought in the dark, with no enemy in sight, won and re-won, every single day, by the simple stubborn act of teaching a child the name of a world the child would never see. Aaron had thought the warship's weapon was its guns. He understood now that the guns were nothing. The weapon was the memory, and the memory had been kept alive by children, generation after generation, each one handed the whole weight of a dead world and asked to carry it one more lifetime, and not one of them, in 11,000 years, had ever set it down. He did not know how a people did that. He only knew that they had, and that the proof of it was in the sky above the home reach, killing empires. The message in the 6th hour was a list of names. It was not the law's kind of list. It was not granted objects and removal orders. It was the names of the crew who had died in the 9 hours of battle, read out one by one, so that they would be remembered, so that the act of remembering them would keep them real, the way remembering Earth had kept Earth real. Aaron read the names off the wall. There were 40 of them. The first was the captain's, a man named Aya Mendel, and beside his name the ship had written that he had given the order to leave the drift field, knowing the warship could not survive what it was sailing into, and had asked only that his name be read after the others, last, when the work was done. The work was not done, so his name was not read. The list ended at the 39th name, and where the 40th should have been, there was a single line, and the line said, "The captain is still aboard." Aaron did not understand, yet, what that meant. He would. Aaron watched the 7th hour from the front of the hall, and the 7th hour was the one that broke the last of his old self. He had clung, until then, to a small private hope that the warship would tire. Everything tired, every engine ran down, every store of power ran dry, every fighting thing had a limit, and the slow verdict had been fighting for 7 hours against numbers no ship could be designed to face. Surely it would slow. Surely, somewhere in the 8th or the 9th hour, the gray hull would falter, and the empires would pour into the gap, and even a thing that refused to be judged would meet the simple arithmetic of fuel and metal and time. The warship did not tire. It slowed, yes, as its wounds mounted, as section after section went dark, but the slowing was not weakness. Aaron came to understand the difference. A tiring thing slows because it is running out. The slow verdict slowed because it was spending itself deliberately, the way a being spends the last of something precious, carefully, on purpose, making each remaining moment count for more than the moment before. It had no intention of surviving. That was the thing the empires never grasped, the thing that made every one of their calculations wrong. They kept fighting as though the warship wanted to live, as though it would eventually choose flight over death, as though there was some threshold of damage past which it would break off and run. There was no such threshold. The slow verdict had left its survival behind in the drift field, 11,000 years dead. It did not want to live. It wanted to finish. And a thing that does not want to live cannot be defeated by being threatened with death, because death is not a threat to it. Death is the plan. In the 7th hour, Aaron finally accepted that the warship would win, not because it was stronger than 6 empires, but because it was willing to pay a price the empires could not even imagine paying, and willingness, in the end, was the only currency that mattered. The empires would spend ships, the slow verdict would spend itself, and the empires had 2 million ships, but the slow verdict had a thing worth more than 2 million ships, which was a reason, and you cannot outspend a reason with metal. By the 8th hour, the 6 empires were no longer 6. The Tessine Reach had broken first, after the scepter, its fleets shattered and fleeing into the folds. Its judgment entered on the wall, guilty, for the removal of 19 worlds across 9,000 years. The Helic Crown followed, then the Pale Accord. Their war hosts did not run out of ships. There were always more ships. They ran out of the thing that ships are made of underneath the metal, the certainty that they could not lose. And once that was gone, the metal was only metal, and the metal came apart against a gray hull that had nothing left to lose, because everything it had was already 11,000 years dead. 3 empires were judged before the 8th hour ended. 3 remained: the Iron Synod, the Auburn Mandate, and at the center of all of it, the Concordance itself, the great machine, the law, the thing that had unwritten Earth. And in the Hall of Findings, Aaron Saul set down his stylus, and stood, and walked to the front of the hall where the senior clerks were trying to compose a new order, an order to commit the last reserves, the home guard, the final fleets that had never left the home reach, because nothing had ever threatened it. He put his hand over the order before they could seal it. The senior clerk looked at him. In 240 years, no clerk had ever stopped another clerk's hand. There was no procedure for it. There was no word for it. The senior clerk simply stared, because the law had not prepared her for a clerk who would do such a thing. Aaron said, quietly, into the ringing of the machine's unbroken tone, that he would not seal an order to attack the slow verdict. He said that he had filed the closing record of the world Habren 200 years ago, and had felt nothing, and that the warship had read his name in the margin, and that he had decided, in the 9th hour of the only battle the galaxy had ever known, that he would rather be remembered than be safe. He said that the law could remove a world, but it could not remove a witness, and that he was going to become a witness, and that the senior clerks could remove him for it if they could, and that he did not think, any more, that they could. Then Aaron Saul, proof clerk of the Concordance of Still Rule for 240 years, walked to the channel that connected the Hall of Findings to the home reach, the channel the slow verdict had been using to speak to the law, and he opened it from his end, clerk to ship, and he sent the warship a message of his own. It was not the law's kind of message. He did not have the words for the law's kind anymore. He sent the only true thing he knew. He sent, "I filed Habron. I am sorry. I remember it now. The world was green, and it grew a grain the catalog did not contain, and I wrote that it never existed, and that was a lie. I am a clerk of the law that murdered Earth, and I am opening the home reach to you, because I would rather be guilty with you than innocent with them. The last fleets are in your path. The captain is still aboard. Tell me what I can do." He pressed his hand to the channel, and he waited. A small clerk who had finally chosen, and out in the burning dark, a warship 11,000 years old, turned toward the home reach for the last time, and answered him. The slow verdict answered Aaron in the captain's own voice, and that was how Aaron learned what the line on the wall had meant. The captain is still aboard. Aya Mendel had not died with the 39. He was alive, and he was speaking, and his voice came down the channel into the Hall of Findings, slow and steady, and worn to the grain like old wood. He did not waste time being surprised that a clerk of the enemy law had opened the home reach to him. Perhaps he had been waiting 11,000 years for exactly one being inside the concordance to choose to remember. Perhaps a man raised on a dead world's memory simply did not expect to be alone. He said, "Clerk, I hear you. We remember Habron too. It is in our hull with all the others. You can stop carrying it alone now. We will carry it with you." Aaron found that he could not speak. The senior clerks had drawn back from him, as if he were unproven, as if the law had already removed him, and only his body had not yet noticed. He did not care. He listened to the captain of the buried ship, and the captain told him what the last hour would cost, and why the 40th name had not been read. The home reach was not a fortress. Aaron knew that. Every clerk knew that. The way you know the shape of the room you were born in. The home reach was the great machine itself, the engine of the law, the proving wall, and the channels, and the deep ledger where every granted object in the galaxy was held real. It did not need walls because it had never needed defending. It was the thing that decided what was real. You could not point a weapon at the thing that decided what was real, because the law would simply rule the weapon unproven before it arrived. That was why the warship had never simply destroyed the home reach. It could break a fleet. It could not break the law, because the law was not made of metal. The law was made of agreement. 2 million ships had agreed to be real, and the concordance held that agreement, and you could shoot the ships, but you could not shoot the agreement. Unless. Aya Mendel explained it slowly, and Aaron, who had spent 240 years inside the machine, understood it before the captain finished, and went cold all over again. The home reach held the galaxy real by holding the ledger. And the ledger had one unresolved object in it, one splinter it had never been able to remove, because that object carried within itself the proof of its own existence, and could not be made to have never happened, the slow verdict. For 11,000 years the warship had been the one thing the law could not unwrite, and the law had hidden it rather than admit that. If the slow verdict entered the deep ledger directly, if it sailed its gray hull, its memory, its 11,000 years of refusing to forget, into the very heart of the machine, and into the deep ledger itself, then the law would have to do, to its own core, the thing it could not do. It would have to resolve the slow verdict, or it would have to admit that there was an object inside its own ledger that it could not resolve, and either answer broke the law forever. A machine that proves the galaxy real cannot contain an object it cannot prove. The splinter would not destroy the home reach. It would do something the law feared far more. It would make the home reach guilty of its own contradiction, and a law that contradicts itself is no longer a law, and the galaxy it held real would be free to remember itself again, world by unwritten world. But the deep ledger was not a place a ship could sail into and out of. It was the floor under reality. To put the slow verdict into the deep ledger, someone had to fly the warship all the way in, past the last fleets, past the home guard, into the channel Aaron had just opened, and once it was in, it could not leave, because a splinter that pulls free is no splinter. The ship would have to stay, forever, held in the heart of the broken machine like a held breath, the one remembered thing at the bottom of the law, keeping the contradiction open so the galaxy could not be sealed shut again. That was the cost. That was the 40th name, a captain who would fly his ship into the deep ledger and never come out. and be the splinter that kept the door open for every world that had ever been unwritten, alone, at the bottom of the dark, forever. Ea Mendel had asked that his name be read last, when the work was done. Now Aaron understood. The work would never be done. The captain would never come out to have his name read. He had known that when he gave the order to leave the drift field. He had been carrying it the whole 9 hours, the only man on the ship who knew he was not going home. Because there was no home. Because Earth was 11,000 years dead, and the only thing he could do with the memory of it was use it to break the law that killed it, and then become the lock that held the break open. Aaron tried, once, to argue him out of it. He knew even as he did it that it was useless, that a man who had spent 11,000 years of his people's patience to reach this exact moment was not going to be talked out of the last step by a clerk who had served the enemy for 240 years. But Aaron could not help it. He had only just learned to feel things again, after a lifetime of feeling nothing, and the first thing he had chosen to feel was that this captain should not have to do this alone, and the second thing, hard on its heels, was that he could not bear it. So he argued. He said there had to be another way to break the law. He said the warship had already won. The empires were already falling. Surely the breaking would finish on its own. He said the captain had given enough. The captain heard him out. Then he said, slow and steady and worn to the grain, that Aaron was wrong about the breaking finishing on its own, and that this was the most important thing for a clerk to understand, so Aaron should listen carefully. The empires were falling, the captain said, but the law was not. The law could outlast the empires. The law was the machine, and the machine did not die when its servants died. If the slow verdict broke the fleets and then withdrew, the home reach would survive, wounded but whole, and within a generation, the survivors would repair it, and within 1,000 years, it would be deciding what was real again, kinder perhaps, slower perhaps, but the same hand on the same switch. The only way to break a law that can outlast its empires is to break it at the bottom, in the deep ledger, in the place where it decides, and to leave something there that it can never resolve and never remove, so that it can never again decide anything at all. And the only thing in all the galaxy that the law could neither resolve nor remove was the slow verdict, because the slow verdict was the one object that carried the proof of its own existence and refused to set it down. So it had to be the ship, the captain said, and it had to stay. A splinter you pull out is no splinter. The ship had to go into the deep ledger and remain there, forever, the one unresolvable thing at the bottom of the law, holding the contradiction open, the way a stone holds a door. There was no other object that could do it. There was no other ship that had spent 11,000 years becoming unforgettable. It had to be the slow verdict, and the slow verdict had to have someone aboard to fly it the last distance into the ledger, by hand, because the channels Aaron had opened could carry a ship to the edge, but a living will had to take it over. That was the 40th name. That was the cost. Not a clever trick, not a weapon, not a sacrifice of metal. A man, at the bottom of the dark, forever, so that the door could never close. Aaron said, into the channel, that there had to be another way. The captain said there was not, and that he had made his peace with it long ago, and that he was not asking Aaron to grieve. He was asking Aaron for one thing only, and it was a clerk's thing, a small thing, the kind of thing a man who had spent his life filing records could do better than anyone. He said, when I am in the ledger, I cannot speak out anymore. The splinter holds the door, but it cannot tell the galaxy why the door is open. Someone outside has to remember. Someone outside has to read the names, and tell the worlds that were unwritten that they are allowed to exist again, and keep the record true, so the empires cannot quietly seal it back up the moment the shooting stops. Clerk, you opened the home reach to me. Will you keep it open after I am gone? Will you be the witness on the outside, the way I will be the witness on the inside? Aaron Saul, who had filed the end of worlds and felt nothing, found that he was weeping, and that he had not wept in 240 years, and that he did not know how to stop, and that he did not want to. He said yes. He said it into the channel, and he said it to the Hall of Findings, and he said it to the senior clerks who had drawn back from him, and then he turned to those clerks, 200 of them, experts in a law that was 9 hours from ending, and he told them what was about to happen. He told them about the deep ledger and the splinter, and the captain who would never come out. He told them that the law that proved them real had murdered a green world 11,000 years ago, and a green world 200 years ago, and 1,000 worlds in between, and had made them all feel nothing, and that he was done feeling nothing. He did not order them to join him. He had spent his whole life under orders, and he would not give one now. He only told them the truth, the whole truth. And then he opened the home, reached the rest of the way, every channel, every gate, the entire path from the cold edge of the fleets, down into the deep ledger, at the heart of the machine, and he stood back, and he let the slow verdict choose its course. Some of the clerks ran, Aaron let them run, some of them stood frozen, and he let them freeze, but 3 of them came and stood beside him, then 6, then 30. By the time the warship reached the inner gate, there were 90 clerks of the Concordance standing at the open channel with Aaron Saul, 90 beings who had decided that they would rather be witnesses than be safe, and the senior clerk who had stared at him an hour before was one of them, and she was weeping too. Einar watched them come, one by one, and he understood something about the law that he had never understood in 240 years of serving it. The law had not made these clerks cruel. It had made them numb, which was different, and which could be undone. Every one of the 90 had filed closing records. Everyone had written the line that said a world never existed and felt nothing, the same as Aaron. The law had given them the lie that let them feel nothing, and they had taken it, because the alternative was unbearable, because no being can carry the grief of 1,000 murdered worlds and stay whole. But the lie had a cost, and the cost was that they had stopped being able to feel anything at all, and a being who feels nothing is not at peace. He is only asleep, and the slow verdict, sailing down through 2 million ships reading the names of the dead, had woken them. Not all of them. Some preferred sleep and ran, but 90 woke, and once they were awake, they could not go back to feeling nothing, and so they came and stood at the open door, and chose the unbearable grief over the comfortable numbness, because the grief at least was true. That was the second thing the warship freed, Aaron thought, watching them gather. The first was the galaxy, but the second was the clerks themselves, the servants of the law, who had been the law's first victims without ever knowing it, numbed into a sleep they had mistaken for peace. The slow verdict had come to review the judgments of the great empires. It had not meant, perhaps, to review the souls of 90 clerks, but it had, and they stood there awake and weeping and alive, and Aaron was proud of them in a way he had no right to be, because he had only woken an hour before them himself. The last fleets of the home reach were in the warship's path. The Iron Synod and the Auburn Mandate had pulled their survivors back into one final wall around the inner gate. 100,000 ships, the last agreement, the last metal between the splinter and the door it had to reach. They fired everything they had into the channel Aaron had opened, and the channel filled with light, and the slow verdict came down it. Aaron watched on the wall. The warship was barely a ship anymore. Half its length was dark. It trailed fire and air, and the bodies of the 39 it could not bury. It should not have been able to move. It moved. It came down the open channel through 100,000 guns the way it had come through everything else, on a long, unhurried curve, slower now, wounded now, but never once turning away, and the captain's voice came with it, reading names. Not the crew's names, the world's names. Habron, the world that sang in the unproven key. The 1,000 worlds in between, 11,000 years of them, every world the law had ruled never to have existed, read aloud one by one, as the warship that remembered them all sailed down into the heart of the law to make them real again. Aaron read the names with him. He could not help it. The 90 clerks read them too. 90 voices in the Hall of Findings, reading the names of unwritten worlds while a gray warship burned its way to the bottom of the dark, and the home reach made its tone. Its long, unbroken tone, the sound of a law that could not resolve what was coming for it. The 100,000 ships of the last wall fired, and could not stop it. The inner gate came apart, the channel to the deep ledger opened, the floor under reality, the place no ship was meant to go, and the slow verdict reached the edge of it, and Aya Mendel stopped reading names, because he had reached the last one, and the last name on the 11,000-year list was the first. The last name was Earth. The captain read it, slow and steady, and worn to the grain, the name of the green world he had never seen, the world that had launched his ship before his great-great-grandparents were born, The world that the law said had never existed, and that he had spent his entire life keeping real by refusing to forget it. Then Aya Mendel said one more thing, to Aaron, to the 90, to the galaxy, the last words the captain of the slow verdict would ever speak from the outside. He said, "Read my name when the door is open. Not before. Tell them a man was here. Tell them we remembered. Tell them it was worth it." And the slow verdict flew into the deep ledger, and the home reach screamed, and the law of still rule broke. The breaking of the law did not look the way Aaron had feared. There was no fire, no collapse, no wave of destruction rolling out from the home reach to swallow the galaxy. The end of 11,000 years was very quiet. The proving wall, which had been ringing its long, unbroken tone for 9 hours, fell silent. For a moment, Aaron thought the machine had simply died, and his heart clenched, because if the machine died, then the galaxy it held real might die with it. Every granted star and world and living thing unwritten all at once, and that was a price too terrible for any victory. But the machine did not die. It stopped. It stopped trying to resolve the splinter, because the splinter was now at the very bottom of it, in the deep ledger, the floor under reality, one gray warship and one living captain held there forever, an object the law could not prove, and could not remove, and could no longer pretend was not there. The law had spent 11,000 years insisting that there was no third state, that every object was granted or removed and nothing else. And now there was a third state, sitting in the machine's own heart, refusing to be either, and the machine could not lie about it anymore, because it was inside. A law that cannot lie is not the law of still rule. It is only a record, and a record does not rule. A record only remembers. That was the victory. That was what the slow verdict had come 11,000 years to do. It had not destroyed the concordance. It had demoted it. It had taken the great machine that decided what was real and turned it back into the thing it should always have been, a ledger that remembers what is, instead of a hand that decides what is allowed to be. The empires would still have their fleets. The clerks would still have their halls. But never again could any of them point at a green world and say it never existed, because the machine that made that lie true was broken, and the thing that broke it was sitting at the bottom of it, remembering. Aaron watched the proving wall, and the proving wall began to do something it had never done. It began to give back the dead, not the people. The captain had been honest about that, in the 6th hour, in the long quiet before the inner gate. The dead were dead. 11,000 years of unwritten worlds did not come back to life because a law broke. The grain of Habron would not grow again. The voices that sang in the unproven key were silent forever. The warship could not undo the murders. Nothing could. But it could undo the lie. And the lie had been the worst part, worse even than the killing, because the killing at least left grief behind, and the lie did not even allow that. The lie said the worlds had never existed, and so no one was permitted to grieve them, and a grief you are not permitted to feel is a wound that never closes. The slow verdict could not bring the worlds back, but it could make it true again that they had been here. It could return them to the record, not as removed, not as never existed, but as real, and lost, and remembered. It could give the galaxy back its right to mourn. The proving wall filled with names. Aaron's name was there, the line he had sealed 200 years ago, but the seal was broken now, and the line had changed. It no longer said the world, Habron is found never to have existed. It said the world Habron existed, and was green, and grew a grain the law could not contain, and was unwritten for it, and is remembered. The lie was gone, the truth was back. And beside it, in the margin, Aaron's small name was still there, but the warship had added a second line to the margin, and the second line said this clerk opened the door. He stood and read it for a long time. Then he remembered the captain's last request, and he turned to the 90 clerks, and he told them the door was open, and that it was time. They read the name, Ea Mendel, captain of the slow verdict, out of Earth, who had flown his wounded ship into the bottom of the law, and stayed there so the galaxy could remember itself. 90 voices in the Hall of Findings read his name aloud, after the 39, after the 11,000 years of worlds, last, when the work was done. And the proving wall took the name, and wrote it into the deep ledger beside the splinter, into the very floor of reality. where it could never be unwritten, because the object it named was the one object the law could not touch. A man was here, we remembered. It was worth it. The home reach displayed the name and held it, and would hold it forever, because the machine no longer had the power to remove anything at all. It could only remember. And so the last act of the law of still rule, the very last thing the great machine ever did with the old authority before it became only a record, was to remember a captain who would never come home, and it did that, and then the authority was gone, and the machine was quiet, and the galaxy was free. The 6 empires did not collapse all at once. Empires that old never do, but they collapsed. The scepter authority, oldest of the 7, was already gone, judged in the first hour, its fleets scattered, its name on the wall in the word it had given the galaxy for 11,000 years, and now received itself. Guilty. The Tessine Reach followed, then the Helic Crown, the Pale Accord, the Iron Synod, the Auburn Mandate, each one breaking, not because its ships were destroyed, but because the thing that held it together was gone. An empire of still rule was not a nation. It was an agreement to obey the law, and the law was broken, and so the agreement was broken, and the empires that had ruled in perfect bloodless silence for 11,000 years discovered, in the space of a single day, that they had never been anything but a hand on a switch, and the switch was gone, and the hand had nothing left to hold. The worlds remembered. That was what truly ended the empires, not the warship's guns, the memory. Across the 7 great empires, on 100,000 worlds that had spent 11,000 years forbidden to mourn, the lie lifted all at once, and beings who had been told their grandmothers' worlds never existed, found in the record that they had, and were green, and were loved, and were lost. You cannot rule beings who have just been given back their grief. They are too awake. They remember too much. The empires of still rule had been built on a galaxy that was not permitted to remember, and the moment the galaxy remembered, there was nothing left for the empires to stand on, and they fell, quietly, the way the law had fallen, the way everything false falls when the thing it denied comes back. From nowhere a warship had appeared, and the great empires had collapsed. The whole galaxy would say it that way. After. They would say it as though it were a single event, a ship arriving and empires falling, cause and instant effect. They would not always remember the 9 hours in between, or the 90 clerks at the open channel, or the captain who read the names. But Iran Saul would remember. Iran Saul would make sure of it, because he had promised a dead man's living voice that he would be the witness on the outside, and a proof clerk of 240 years knew, better than anyone alive, that the truth survives exactly as long as someone keeps the record true. He kept it true. When the empires fell, there was a danger, and Irun had seen it coming since the 6th hour. The danger was not the empires. The empires were finished. The danger was that the beings who survived them would do what survivors always do. They would try to seal it back up. They would say the breaking of the law had been a catastrophe, and that someone should be put in charge to prevent another one, and they would build a new machine, a kinder one, a wiser one, and they would tell themselves this time it would only remember and never decide, and within 1,000 years it would be deciding again, because that is what a hand on a switch always becomes. Aaron had served such a machine for 240 years. He knew exactly how it began. It began with someone meaning well. So Aaron did the last thing the captain had asked of him, and it was the hardest, harder than opening the door, harder than reading the names. He made certain the door stayed open. He did not take charge. That was the whole of it. 90 clerks had stood with him at the channel, and when it was over, when the empires fell, and the survivors looked around for someone to follow, those 90 clerks were the obvious choice. They had broken the law. They had freed the galaxy. They could have built a new order with themselves at the top of it, and the galaxy, frightened and grieving and newly free, would have let them, would have begged them to, the way frightened beings always beg someone to decide for them. Biharn refused. He gathered the 90, and he told them the truth one more time, because the truth was the only authority he would ever use again. He told them that the captain had not died at the bottom of the law, so that 90 clerks could climb to the top of it. He told them that the splinter held the door open so that no one would ever again decide what was allowed to be real, and that the moment any of them sat in the empty seat of the concordance, the splinter would have died for nothing. He told them that the only thing the 90 were permitted to do, the only thing, was to remember, and to teach the galaxy to remember, and to make sure that the record stayed a record, and never again became a hand. Then he opened the great machine to everyone. The deep ledger, the proving wall, the channels, the entire engine that had decided the galaxy reel for 11,000 years. Erun opened all of it to every world that wanted to read it. Not to rule, to remember. Any being, on any world, could now look into the record and see what had been done, and to whom, and by whom, and could see the splinter at the bottom holding the door, and could read the captain's name. The law that had been a secret weapon became a public memory, owned by no one, controlled by no one, only kept, the way you keep a grave, so that the dead are remembered, and the living do not forget how they died. It was not a government. It had no fleets. It could not make a single being do a single thing. It could only remember and refuse to lie, and Erun believed, with the only faith he had left, that a galaxy that remembered and refused to lie would not need to be ruled, because most of the cruelty of still rule had been the lie, and the lie was over. There were those who said he was a fool for it. In the first years after the empires fell, when the galaxy was raw and frightened and full of beings who had just been handed back the grief of 1,000 worlds, there were many who came to Erun and told him he was making a terrible mistake. They said a galaxy without a law would tear itself apart. They said someone had to decide that beings could not be trusted to simply remember and refrain, that the empties left by the fallen empires would fill with warlords and butchers far worse than the cold clerks of still rule had ever been. They were not wrong to fear it. Erun feared it too. He had no proof that an unruled galaxy would not become a slaughterhouse. He had only the warship, and the captain, and the one thing he had learned at the very bottom of the law, which was that the cure for cruelty is not a kinder hand on the switch. The cure is to take away the switch. So he took it away, and he kept taking it away, every time someone tried to rebuild it. That was the real work of his last years, and it was not glamorous, and the children who heard the story afterward rarely asked about it, because it was not a battle, it was a refusal. Again and again, some council or alliance or frightened majority would propose a new authority, a new machine, a new central voice to decide the hard questions, and every time, Erun would go before them, an old clerk with no fleet and no rank, and nothing but the open record at his back, and he would tell them about the deep ledger, and the splinter, and the captain who would never come home, and he would ask them whether they truly meant to make that sacrifice meaningless, by building, again, the very thing it had died to break. And every time, so far, they had listened. Not because Erun had power, because the record was true, and a true record, read aloud, is harder to argue with than any fleet. He did not know if it would hold forever. No one could know that. A galaxy is a long time, and the temptation to let someone else decide is older than any empire. But it held in his lifetime, and he taught the 90, and the 90 taught the 900, that it must be made to hold in theirs, and that the work of keeping the switch from being rebuilt was never finished, the way the captain's work at the bottom of the dark was never finished, and that this was not a burden, but the whole shape of being free. He spent the rest of his life as the keeper of that memory. He was not a leader, and he never became one. He was a clerk. He had always been a clerk. He simply changed which thing he kept the record for. For 240 years he had kept the record of a law that decided what was real. For the rest of his life he kept the record of a warship that had refused to let the law decide, and of a captain at the bottom of the dark, and of 11,000 years of worlds that were green, and were loved, and were lost, and were, at last, allowed to be mourned. He went down to the deep ledger once, near the end of his life. Beings asked him not to. It was dangerous, they said, to go near the splinter, near the broken floor of reality. Erun went anyway. He was very old by then, older than any clerk had a right to be, and he wanted, before he died, to stand as close as a living thing could stand, to the place where the captain was. He could not see the slow verdict. There was nothing to see. The deep ledger was not a place with light in it. It was the floor under things, and the warship was held in it the way a held breath is held, present and not visible, real and not removable. But Erun stood at the edge of it, and he spoke into it, the way he had spoken into the channel on the day the law broke, clerk to ship. He said, The door is still open, the empires are gone, and no new one has taken their place. The galaxy remembers. The worlds are mourned. Habron is in the record, green and grieved. Your 39 are remembered. Your name is read at the end of every telling. Last, when the work is done, the way you asked. I kept it true. I am old now, and I will not come down here again, and I wanted you to know, before I go, that it worked. You were right. It was worth it. Rest, Captain. You can rest. We have it from here. There was no answer. There would never be an answer. The captain at the bottom of the dark could not speak from inside the splinter, could only hold the door, forever, the witness on the inside, the way Aaron had been the witness on the outside. But Aaron stood there a long time in the dark, an old clerk at the edge of the broken law, and he found that he did not need an answer, because the proof was all around him. The galaxy was free. The lie was over. The dead were mourned. The record was true. That was the answer. The warship had appeared from nowhere, and the great empires had collapsed. And where they had stood, there was no new empire, only a record that remembered, and a galaxy that grieved, and a door held open at the bottom of the dark by a man who had given everything, so that no one would ever again be told they had never existed. Iran Saul died not long after, an old clerk, in a quiet room, with the record true. The 90 had become 900 by then, and the 900 had become a thing without a name, a galaxy of beings who kept the memory, because keeping the memory was the whole of the freedom they had been given. They read the names at every telling. They read the worlds, 11,000 years of them, and the 39, and last, when the work was done, the captain. And they told it the way it had happened, which was the only way worth telling. They told how the law had ruled the galaxy in perfect bloodless silence, deciding what was real and unwriting what displeased it, and how it had murdered a green world called Earth and felt nothing, and how it had not counted on a single warship out in the dark, carrying the memory of that world in its hull and its crew, refusing to be told it had never existed. They told how the ship was buried, and how it waited 11,000 years, and how it came at last from nowhere, scarred and gray and unafraid, and reviewed the judgments of the great empires one by one, and found them guilty, and broke the law at the bottom of itself, and freed a galaxy to remember. They told how the warship never failed. That was the part the children always asked about, and it was the truest part. 2 million ships, 6 immortal empires, the whole assembled might of 11,000 years of silence, all of it poured into the destruction of one gray hull, and the hull never turned away, never retreated, never lost, never once stopped coming. It was wounded, it was burned, it left 39 of its own in the dark, but it never failed, because it could not be made to fail, because the thing it was made of was not metal. It was made of memory, and a memory that refuses to forget cannot be defeated. It can only be honored. And so they honored it. The freed galaxy, forever. The way you honor the thing that gave you back your grief and called it a gift. They kept the record true. They never built a new empire. They never again let a machine decide what was real. And at the end of every telling, when the worlds were named and the 39 were named, they read the last name, slow and steady and worn to the grain, the captain who was still aboard, still holding the door, still remembering, at the bottom of the dark, so that no one above it would ever have to be alone, in the way the galaxy had been alone, before a warship appeared from nowhere, and refused, simply refused, to forget. Yea Mendel, a man was here. We remembered. It was worth it.